Hey folks, Johnny Flyer here. I've got a cool little project. I have a Seaboard 970. This is a silver meteor variant, and this is the one that has a little guy on top here that likes to travel back and forth. Unfortunately, he does not travel, as you may see here. There's a little bit of a buzz when you turn the transformer on, but not much else. So I'm going to take this one apart. Took a little bit of research. I went back to Mr. Barker's book. Some of you may have a copy of it. Highly recommend that you buy it. And look at the bottom here. There's not screws. There are these little fittings here, I guess. You start with these back ones. I don't know if you can see. There we go. But you pull these out using a pair of pliers first, and then you got to kind of dig underneath it. With a screwdriver, and then you pull the whole thing out. Sorry, other way around. So dig underneath with a screwdriver first, and then pull out with a pair of pliers. So we're going to do that and kind of figure out if we can diagnose what's going on, clean up these wheels and the contacts here, give it a good once over. But most of you know that my grandfather worked for Seaboard Railroad. If you've been watching my podcast, whatever this is, watching some of my videos for a while now. And so I like to try to grab every Seaboard car or engine that I can, which usually isn't very hard because these are not necessarily very good quality, and they're, as far as action cars, most of them have the doors are sealed shut. This one was interesting to me because it has a guy who kind of walked across the top, and it's an action car, which makes it sort of unique. One of the more recent. I say recent. It was the Lionel, the Flyer release from Lionel that had a operating door, and the paint scheme was a little redder, not quite as Tuscan as this one, and it looks nice. I don't own one just yet, although I think I'm going to go ahead and hop on a couple here that I see occasionally on eBay and up for sale, just because it's nice to have, and I can run a consist with all Seaboard stuff with my grandfather's frame, so kind of a tip of the hat to him. As you can see, some of the decals not in great shape here. I will probably work to replace these, and the rest, however, looks pretty good. So we're going to dig into this and see if we can't figure out what is going on with our action car here. All right, so we have the 970 is now taken apart. That took a little bit of doing, and I wanted to take a moment to talk about how you go about doing that. And if you look in Mr. Barker's book on repair of American Flyer trains, he's got a fairly good rundown verbally of how this works, but the pictures I find don't necessarily do it any justice. And so I looked, and I had somebody kind of talk me through it. And so you may notice that we had the American Flyer Missouri Pacific number 629. Oops, 629 has now joined us on the table. And the reason why is both of these bodies are held in using the same technique. These little pins right here. And they go in through the bottom, and you can see the holes here, I hope. Right there at the top. There we go. So they come in right about here. And the way to pull those out, I found that at least was most useful, was I went go through a series of tiny screwdrivers, these little jewel screwdrivers. And you got to be careful because these are not necessarily the most sturdy or rigid, and they do have a tendency to break. So, and I've broken one before, not doing this, but doing something else. So I was trying to be careful. So what I did was I kind of worked my way around the edges of, you notice these have sort of a standard lip to them. So I tried to work around the edges to get underneath it with the smaller tip. I don't know if you can see it there. The smaller tip. And then what I did was I worked my way to something a little bit bigger and more substantial when I could. And Mr. Barker recommends that you go at it with a pair of needle nose pliers. I found that didn't work out so well because here there wasn't enough space to get into. And I learned a tough lesson on the 970 here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little crack right there. And the reason that occurred is because in the process of trying to take that one off, I got a little bit overzealous and it slipped, went right into the side and cracked it. And thankfully on Missouri Pacific, this one has a little bit of a lip here and protected it, so it did slip a couple times, but it didn't damage the plastic. Unfortunately, not so with the 970 Seaboard, but happened in such a place where I can fix the plastic and glue it back together, and it will be noticeable, but not terribly so. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what makes the 970 work and part of what the problem was. As you can see, a good bit of rust around the edges, certainly where those pegs were keeping the body onto the frame. And that was part of the problem too, was I did not use, frankly, enough WD-40 to get it to loosen up. But as with most American Flyer stuff, it's built around either a solenoid or a standard type of engine. This one's the same way. A little bit of rust on here. I've already taken some CRC 226 to this to try to at least start the curing process and try to protect this a little bit. The rust I think I'm going to have to go at with either a Dremel tool or maybe some kind of a hard bristle brush just to get off. I might consider repainting. I just don't like the way that these look when they're repainted. I'm going to go through and look at some of my extra stuff and see if I maybe have an extra frame here I can use. But if not, this one works just fine. And it's not in terrible shape, but there is some rust. So again, the solenoid works like most do. And so the electricity goes into the coils here, creates a vibrating process, or vibrates against, I guess, an alternating magnet, and it creates this vibration in this part of the frame right here. Now, what I found here was somebody had really cranked down on this thing, and there wasn't a whole lot of room for this thing to move, and it was not vibrating. And the reason why is I think somebody had just kind of cranked down on this part, and this is meant to be, I believe, reading the instructions, this is meant to be a way of keeping, I guess, changing the intensity of the vibration. So I'm going to play around with this just a little bit and see if I can't get it to tighten up. But yeah, it gets a little bit kind of finger tight right there. What I ended up having to do is I had to take it off. The body right now won't go back like this. You've got to have it turned kind of like this in an up position, so the body, this little, oops, there it is. That little groove right there will fit the turning handle. Not exactly sure. I may have to play around with that a little bit. I think it's supposed to be able to be turned, but right now the way that it's set up, it will not turn. There's not enough room here when it's fitted back in for me to turn the adjustment handle. Not the end of the world, but anyway, so I did manually just kind of move this frame. You can kind of see what I did. I just leaned on the frame. Now the frame is set up with a lot of the typical lip groove kind of set up there, and I just adjusted that mechanically with a set of needle nose pliers. Got it to come loose, and tried to make sure I could get it to vibrate. Well, the top, pretty simple here. This is the same kind of material that is on the stockyard, and same principle involved. In fact, if those of you who remember the old mechanical or electric football games, not quite the same idea, but the concept is similar in that the vibrating solenoid here connects to these little nubbins right here that stick through the pad, vibrate this back and forth, and like the stockyard, a better condition little mat there, it will then sit here, and this will then, the vibrations will cause it to move back and forth, and our little guy here, who unfortunately was impaled a la Vlad the toy impaler, who was the previous owner of this, jammed it all the way through the body. I think it goes just fine if you if we take it easy. I might try to fix that with a little bit of putty or something, and then repaint this guy. But it does work, and so let me put it on the track, just to give you an idea. Okay, and here he goes. Off it goes. Okay, so you get the idea. Vibrations cause many vibrations move in such a way where the directional material that's on the bottom of this thing just kind of moves forward, and again, it works just like the stockyard. And so I'm going to clean this up just a bit. I'm going to replace that material on the bottom, and I'm going to fix our poor impaled lamp guy here and get him back and working. But all in all, it's going to be a pretty easy fix. I think some of the rust mitigation stuff is going to be a pain in the butt, but it always is. And not happy about cracking the frame there, but you can tell it's not terribly visible, and honestly, when it's in a consist, most folks aren't going to be looking for a tiny crack at the bottom there. Okay, so let's move back to the Missouri Pacific really quickly here, and we'll close this one out for now. Missouri Pacific is taking on some of this characteristic kind of whitening on the Bakelite plastic here. However, this is a little bit different in that it is not the type of whitening that like you could see some of which was happening on the link couplers, where if you just take a heat gun to it and carefully kind of melt it back down, it turns black again. This was not reacting the same way. This is a different kind of reaction. Wish I could tell you what that is. I'm going to do a little research and see if I can't figure out why it's doing that. However, the good news is, took a little bit of WD-40 here, and you can kind of see on my finger, it's starting to come off pretty easily. So I think a little bit of WD-40, maybe some Armor All, should have this cleaned up pretty nicely and nice and shiny. So next video we do, I'm going to have both of these put back together, seal both of these with CRC 226, just to give a little bit of coverage. Again, I don't recommend you do CRC 226 on painted surfaces, but since both of these are plastic, this one and this one is the Tuscan plastic, it is not painted. So I'll do the sealing around the decals there. And we'll see if we can't get this one back into shape. Interestingly, this 629 has what's evidently characteristic for this particular engine, or car rather, is this little hump or bend. So I guess it was just a thing at the time where the plastic itself, these long pieces of plastic would bend and melt. I've seen a lot of tanker cars like that as well. But anyway, so that's where we are, and we'll get to work on just some cosmetic restorations that I'm kind of in the mood to do right now, along with a bunch of other projects that are currently sitting on the table, but need to clear some off and get back to operating. So for now, that's where we stand. Thanks for watching, everybody.